It all started with a prompt. I can no longer find it, but it went something like this. Build a 4X strategy game with inverted themes. I found it in an indigenous game developers forum. I've always had a love of games with large maps to influence and stat balancing or team building mechanics, i.e. growing an empire in Sid Meier's Civilization 6, or comparing the differences between my boxes and boxes of Pokemon. I wanted to combine all these mechanics while exploring that prompt, something that's been in the back of my mind for ages. Now, Civ 6 and Pokemon might seem like an odd combination at first, but I've found a way to make it work. Imagine every unit you place in Civ is a unique, named individual with their own strengths and weaknesses, like a Pokemon or a Dungeons & Dragons character. You can really use any RPG as an example here. The 4X game would feel like raising a clan of disparate RPG characters to manage the game world. The 4X's in 4X stand for Explore, Expand, Exploit, and Exterminate. These are the core aspects of a strategy war game, and there's so much I love about the genre. But the more I learn of my own people's history, people on the receiving end of many of those X's, the more I feel conflicted about the themes behind these games. So I would like to make my own game, one which builds off the general 4X formula, but introduces new mechanics by inverting those themes. For example, instead of expanding into a new area and exploiting their resources, you have to consider sustainable management to maintain your tactical advantage. The game would also be set in a fantasy world. I've been a lifelong fantasy fan, from works like Warcraft and the Dying Earth to Conan the Barbarian and Lord of the Rings. Fantasy as we know it today, stock fantasy as some call it, is largely informed by Dungeons & Dragons, which is informed by Tolkien's work, which is in turn derived from Western European history and mythology. I would like to derive my setting from the roots of fantasy just as Tolkien did, by distilling world history and myths into the different cultures present in the game. There's history from each continent that I'm very excited to adapt for this project. The game world is divided into hexagonal tiles, where each tile can have a building and one or more parties. Parties are groups of units that move as one. They can engage in combat together to simulate large battles like those seen in Lord of the Rings. Individual units within parties can pick up or generate items. These items may drop from slain enemies, or are generated by buildings, or can be given as rewards for completing quests. The goal of the game is to form parties and move them around the map, securing buildings which provide resources, build map presence, and stamp out rival kingdoms to win. I'm basically putting RPG mechanics over the 4X formula, which is much like what Warcraft 3 did for real-time strategy games. I decided to go with the Nim language and Raylib library to handle the game window, rendering, and input. I chose Nim because it can compile to C for high performance, and it's strongly typed with lots of modern language features. This is a very rules-heavy project, so I'd like to go with a strict compiler to weed out errors before my code even runs. I wanted to make the game fully moddable, so once I got Hello World working, I shifted gears to the mod loading system. Mods are important to me in games because they help players get interested in engineering and customizing their own play experience. Games like Minecraft and Dwarf Fortress have the kind of mod ecosystem that I would like to foster in this project, so modding needs to be accessible. There's only one problem. I plan to compile the game from Nim into C and then a binary executable. Modding is easier when it's done in a scripting language that the game can read as it's being played, no matter which device it's being played on. This is why so many games use Lua for their mods. There's no guarantee that the mod developer compiles their code into the same format that the player is using. So how can I make mods work in Nim? Well, the Nim compiler has excellent cross-compilation features. If I'm coding Nim on Windows, then I can still build an executable for Mac or Linux. My mod development tool, written in Python, automatically compiles your mod code into several formats, then zips them all together into a single archive file. The game is then designed to extract the correct format from that archive and dynamically link the code to itself at runtime. Modding problem solved. And with that, I was free to implement the meat and potatoes of my game. Units, structures, pathfinding, menu UI, items for your units, camera controls, sprite loading, fog of war, combat, the party system, you name it, I developed it. I needed a playable demo so I could gauge where the rest of the project would go. And when I finally had an MVP, I realized it had several problems. First off, the party system. You could move individual units in this game, but you could also stack them up into parties that move together. Parties as in Dungeons and Dragons, like a Pokemon team. It was just too many clicks to stack up your units, and I was worried you'd lose track of them if they weren't the party leader. I made sure each tile could display multiple units or parties, but I couldn't ever guarantee that everyone would be visible at all times. Also, I worry that the pixel art would get confusing or look bad if you had a building with units on top of it. And the sprite sizes I had chosen just weren't great either. It allowed for multiple arrangements of sprites on a single tile, but each character couldn't be expressed in the level of detail that I had in my head. They looked ugly to me, and didn't make much sense without me explaining them. And that's just bad visual design. The more I thought of these problems, the more it weighed on my mind, and the project nearly lost its magic. So I let this project stew in the back of my mind again, and when the time came, I went back to the drawing board and came up with the perfect answer to all of these shortcomings. But that's a video for another time. Stick around if you're interested in the development of this project. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.